Hello, hello. Are we live? Checking that my audio is okay. It looks okay. Hey, Norm, how's it going? Are we getting music through at all? I think my audio is weird. Okay, well, we'll just go with no music today. All right, you're gonna be live streaming your PKM stuff in a bit. Awesome, awesome. If anyone's watching the recording, go check out That's the Norm. He also does some awesome PKM streaming in Rome with a much more sophisticated setup than what I'm doing here. Oh, dude, happy birthday! You gonna celebrate it all? Nice. That's one kind of present, I suppose. It's good stuff. All right. Today I'm not streaming for super long, but I did want to talk about two things. One, I wanted to talk about mess and how personal knowledge management systems should be messy. And then I wanted to show an example and also work on a real blog post. I'm working on a blog post about carbon dioxide and volatile organic compounds in the air and how those affect your productivity, how those affect your thinking, how those affect the way you feel. Like many people who work remote, I sit in an office, and when you close the door in a room, suddenly you're producing all the CO2. And it's actually surprising how quickly CO2 levels raise in an office. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's talk about mess. Mess is super important. I think there's this minimalist sort of tidying person named Marie Kondo, who's very popular for her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And you would think that on the surface, she's all about having perfectly organized, super tidy spaces, but she actually loves mess. And it's not just because she has some weird, like, I need to tidy, hobby, but mess is important for like creative processes. So let's talk about that. I'm gonna make a page called "I Love Mess" because I love that phrase. This is something that Marie Kondo said in one of her Netflix specials. And there's just a scene where I think someone is talking about how messy their space is, and she says, "I love mess." And it's such a weird contrast with this person you think would be super into minimal, very tidy spaces. But why mess? I think our PKMs. Actually, I want to generalize this. Workspaces should be messy. Why? There's a sort of a counter argument here, where a lot of people would say, "Oh, your workspace should be super clean, right, and free of distraction." When I have these sort of like two statements that are opposing to each other, I do like to use a hashtag called tension. it's one of the few times when I'll use a concept hashtag, but it's more of an indicator. Like, hey, this is an idea that you want to look at that might have some opposing ideas. So if you think about why should workspaces be messy? Well, when a workspace is messy, there's more opportunity. Let's say why should a workspace be messy? Well, I'll say there's more opportunity for new ideas to be generated, new connections, new ideas. Right? There's obviously some level of mess where you can't move at all, but I think the right amount of mess enables more creativity than a completely blank slate. For instance, I have all these different notes open, and I'm not seeing anything right now, but if it was just focused on this one space, it would be hard for me to bring in other ideas. Now, this is also very personal, right? Some people do not work this way, and if they see a whole bunch of stuff on the screen like this, they might get distracted. So again, that's a personal thing. But for me, a workspace, there's more opportunity for new connections and ideas to be generated. You're not wasting. Wasting is the wrong word. You're not allocating a ton of time towards organizing and cleaning, right? Especially with something like a PKM, it's easy to spend too much time organizing, cleaning, finding the right tags and folders to be putting in. If you treat it more like a workspace, like a workshop where there's going to be parts lying around, things that are unfinished lying around, there's more opportunity to make things happen. And lastly, a reason why I like having messy workspaces there was one more thing I really wanted to touch on, and I'm blanking right now. Yes. When a note is too well formatted, you're going to hesitate to change it, right? If someone hands you a design and it's just perfectly formatted, it's got, everything is perfectly labeled, the colors are great, it looks like they spent a lot of time aligning everything and getting everything beautifully looking. You might nitpick like one or two small things, but you're not going to do like an overhaul of the whole design. Whereas if someone hands you a sketch on the back of a napkin, it's very rough, and the roughness invites you to think about it, to think more deeply about it. So rather than looking at this thing as a completed project, you realize, internally, you realize that this is a work in progress. This is something that needs to be worked on. And for something like a personal knowledge management, where mess invites you to continue working on the thing, and if it's too polished, it looks like a finished product. You're not going to want to work on a finished product because it says, "Hey, I'm done," and it's not inviting, right? So, this is related to digital gardens, right? Because I think a digital garden should be messy, and that's why I love the garden metaphor. Is that gardens are inherently messy. I mean, there's dirt on the ground, right? These natural processes of growing and decaying create this disorder. And of course, in a garden, we want to put some amount of order on it. That's what differentiates a garden from nature. But there still requires some amount of mess. I don't like, say, a rose garden with perfectly spaced even rows of roses. That's not as beautiful to me as something like a more natural looking curated garden that still has some level of chaos and mess. This brings to mind concepts like nebulosity. That's a fancy word for saying you can't something that can't be well defined, right? You might say well, how do you define what a cloud is? Well, a cloud is very nebulous. What's inside the cloud, what's outside the cloud. It's not super clear where the barrier is. You might say, oh, it's where you can't see the particles anymore. It's not white, but the shape of the cloud is always changing. These things are nebulous. Yeah, let's see. Norm says Kondo has a powerful relationship with mess because she has this powerful tacit definition of a mess and can dissociate joyful messes versus unhelpful ones. Cool. Yeah, for sure. There's definitely there's a tendency for people who are into PKM to really want perfect order, and again, this perfect order kind of discourages you from working on it. It makes you feel like, oh, if it's not perfect, then I don't want to do it. It prevents you from taking those fleeting thoughts where you have that shower thought and you just want to write it down, but then you're like, oh, like I don't know where it should go. I don't know how I should categorize it. Just throw it in there. Make some related to notes. You can always come back, and if it's important, you'll come back to the note and you'll clean it up later. Cool. So it's good if your PKM is a mess, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a messy person and I don't want to clean up my PKM. I think it's important to keep your workspaces messy. Just to look at this tension, I have this strong belief about workspaces should be messy. Let's look at workspaces should be super clean and free of distraction. There's a school of thought that says, oh, like I want nothing on my desk. I don't necessarily agree with this. Right? And this is, again, this is a personal knowledge management. So I'm writing things like, I don't agree with this, stuff like that. Okay, so why, like I'm gonna steel man this argument, like why should a workspace be super clean? Right? When I think about super clean workspaces, I think about those minimalist desk setup YouTube videos where there's minimal desk setup YouTube videos where there's like a monitor and a mouse and a keyboard on the desk and there's nothing else. And people will say, oh, if my workspace is clean, I can focus just on the task at hand. And that's pretty compelling, actually. It's not the way I work, but I know that some people do work this way. I know that in Rome, a very popular feature of Rome is that you can zoom into a bullet point and look at just one bullet point. For instance, if I could, I think there's a plugin for Obsidian to do that, but if I had it installed, I could zoom into this if my workspace is clean bullet and only focus on that. Again, some people find that really helpful. I just don't. Like, to me, a blank page is a blocker for me. So why should a workspace be super clean? Here's some reasons. That reminds me of if my workspace is clean, I can just focus on the task at hand. Why don't I like super clean workspaces? This also reminds me of the Mercedes-Benz Formula One, I guess they call it a shop. I don't know. If you think about an auto garage, most car garages are very messy, right? There's oil all over the place. There's little parts. There's all this junk. But if you look at, say, the Mercedes Formula One shop, it's pristine. Like the floors are painted white. You almost never see any oil stain. You don't see any oil stains anywhere. They're very very diligent about keeping their workspace clean, and they're a top Formula One team. They've won world championships for the past 6 or 7 years. So maybe there is something to having a super clean workspace. This also reminds me of the book Work Clean. I'll call it book Work Clean by Dan Charnas. This is a really good one. And in this book, Dan investigates top level kitchens. What do what do the best run restaurants in the world do, and he examines sort of behaviors and patterns that are in the best kitchens in the world, and tries to pull those and pull some of those unique things into the knowledge, like the knowledge workers workspace. So one thing that the top chefs do is they prepare their workspace and they make sure it's got exactly what it needs and nothing more, and it's very clean in that way. Not necessarily like a minimal thing, but just enough. And maybe that's a happy middle ground for some people. But I still think for a PKM specifically, having extra entry points, having mess, having all these notes lying around, at least for me, that's more generative. I don't want to leave this note empty, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my own notes on work clean and pull those in. Right, so my normal PKM would have this already here, but I'm just linking this here, so there's at least something in this note. Okay, having said that a mess is good, I'm going to actually close a lot of these. Because we're not going to talk about them next. I love mess. Cool. So, okay, we talked about mess, probably for too long, but, I enjoyed thinking about this stuff. This is where, the PKM is a space to come and think about ideas that you believe in, to sort of attack them, reshape them. It's pretty fun. But, I did want to show that personal knowledge management systems, there's a tendency to just have fun and dink around, but I think it's really important to keep in touch with reality, and the way to do that is to release things into the wild and have people actually like critique it and look at it. You can see if people find your work helpful or not, right? I think Nicholas Luhmann, he wrote dozens of books and probably hundreds of papers, something like that. I could be wrong, but the guy who made Zettelkasten, and he wrote all these books before ever like really telling that many people about his PKM, right? Like, I think there's a tendency to over spend too much time on PKM stuff, which I'm obviously guilty of. Here I am live streaming, building one from scratch instead of using my existing one, but yeah, I want to show how you can use a PKM to start pulling together real world projects, and that can also guide your thinking a little bit, right? A lot of times a PKM can be very all over the place, especially when you're starting. There's so many ideas that you probably have in your head, so many things that you're thinking that focusing it down to a project can be helpful, right? So in my projects page, my projects folder, I've got this thing called, there's make 100 notes, which is one thing we're working towards, and there's evaluate air quality in my office. And here I've written that I want to write a blog post and a YouTube video about air quality and its effect on thinking and working, right? And I think a project should typically have a deadline, so I'm going to say deadline for the blog post is, what's reasonable? Let's say the 15th of September. Okay. Let's actually, do I have a calendar plugin? I think I might. Yeah, okay, so we can actually pull out this day. So we're going to create that daily note, and then we're going to link to it. Let's see, go back. Okay, so we can say 09:15. Cool. And my monitor shut off. Let me just fix that real quick. This calendar is an extra plugin. I think it's a core plugin, but it's pretty handy if you want to make notes like this, so that when you come to the 15th, you'll see that something is due. Hopefully you'll know that before that. Just, for people who weren't here before, I don't use PKMs for task management. I know a lot of people do, but I find keeping a task manager separate from my PKM is good. Where did my chat window go? Where'd you guys go? Okay. Hi, chat. Okay, so blog post about air quality. Why? I work in an office. I wanted to know if sitting in an office with a closed door and a closed window was impacting my ability to think well. And I've seen some inklings of like, hey, like you should be worried about this stuff on Twitter and elsewhere. And I actually found this video by DHH. He's one of the co-founders of Basecamp, and he released this talk on air quality. So I didn't do this on stream, but basically what I did was I watched the video and I took down any notes that really stood out to me as interesting. So here I've got a bunch of notes, and then I also had a section for kind of like rabbit holes to chase. During the talk, he mentioned a bunch of papers that might be interesting to look at. So we might pull some of those up and take a look at them. And I've also got a section that like random shower thoughts that came up while I was watching this video. One of which was like, oh, like there was that thing where this one woman was advocating for fresh air in hospitals, and it helped during some plague. Like I don't remember what it was, but maybe we can find it. Anyways, in the video, DHH talks about how they moved into a brand new house. It was new construction, and his wife was having just horrible headaches. And they looked at all the symptoms that she was having, and it looked like formaldehyde poisoning, which is kind of nuts. But it turns out that their house had really, really bad ventilation. Modern houses have been built for energy saving, so there's basically no drafts in the house. But what that means is that there's no ventilation either. So if your house is full of new couches and new furniture, they're all off-gassing these particles. So anyway, he found out that ventilation is super important in your house, and that having too many particulate matter things like outgassing in your house and no way to ventilate them is really bad for your cognitive abilities. And it's not just these like volatile compounds or VOCs. It's also CO2, right? CO2 is something that we breathe out, and it just accumulates in a room if there's no ventilation. And CO2 can also negatively impact your ability to think. There's some charts here where you can, these studies, they looked at like basic activity levels and like, task orientation, like crisis response. And if, this is kind of cut off, but this gray one is like sort of a modern building with poor ventilation. You can see like for strategy, like how horrible people were doing on strategy, with an elevated level of, I think this was, volatile compounds or PM25 or something. And it's insidious because this is stuff that you don't notice. It's kind of like sleep deprivation. When you're sleep deprived, you don't notice that you're not sleeping well, or sorry, that you're not thinking well. And similarly, when you're in an environment with moderate to high levels of carbon dioxide, you don't really notice it. You don't start to get headaches, but you can see that, on these charts, like doing things like strategy, thinking, planning, your ability just tanks. It's really bad. And I've actually got a CO2 monitor here. I'm sitting at like 700 with my door closed and my window open. I think with my door open, I can get it down to like 500. Yeah, basically, high CO2 is bad. So ventilate your room if you can. Figure out how to do that. So yeah, I'm thinking about writing my own blog posts. This lecture is like an hour and a half long, and it's very, windy. I wanted more of a resource for people to think about air quality. And in fact, I'm actually going to make a page that's a resource called Air Quality. right? Sort of a one-stop shop. But I also want to work on this this paper. If we open air quality, let's see. I want to move this to resources. Oops, didn't want to do that. I want to move it to move file to resources. Cool. And we'll fill this out later. One way I like to think about projects like blog posts, like videos, is to fill out a bunch of questions, right? So let's sign up some potential questions you might have about air quality, right? So why does air quality matter? What are the compounds and gases that affect cognitive function? How can we mitigate bad air quality, right? I'm lucky that I live in Seattle, where the air quality is extremely good. But if you live in a polluted city in China or India or a lot of these up and coming countries, the effects of air pollution can be horrible, and you can't just crack open a window. Why does air quality matter? What are compounds and gases that affect cognitive function? How can we mitigate bad air quality? What else do we need to know about air quality? Let's see. We can think about where do these compounds and gases come from? What are acceptable levels to watch out for? How can I measure air quality? Right. What else might you ask about air quality? CO2. Do plants improve air quality? Answering these kind of questions gives you a framework for putting together a blog post, and it also makes for a really good SEO when you're writing a blog. These are things that people search for, and Google likes it when they find your blog and find an answer. I would probably move this up here. Okay, so I mean, with this, we're starting to put together a framework for a blog, and we can take a look at, we can start at looking at these notes from the video, and start diving into these different rabbit holes to take a look at useful information. So yeah, why does air quality matter? Well, if we are knowledge workers, and our ability to think creatively and rationally is very important, right? Poor air quality can impact our ability to think clearly. Poor air quality can basically make us stupider, make us stupider, right? And if you're in an office and your primary value to your workplace or to your own work is thinking, knowledge work, then we want to put ourselves in an environment where we can think the clearest. We want to think. I guess I already said that. So okay. So why does air quality matter? And here's where we would start to link to some of these charts, some of these papers. Let's see. yeah, like this is one I want to look up and pull the text for. So let's do that right now. See if we can find the text of this. Cool. It's on PubMed. We can at least look at the abstract and some figures. I don't have a subscription to journals, but there are places online to find open access to these sorts of things. I won't mention them live on stream, but they're available. Anyways, results. On average, cognitive scores were 61% higher on the green building day and 101% higher on the 2 green plus building days than on the conventional building day. Both VOCs and CO2 were independently associated with cognitive scores. Okay, so there's, let's see, let's turn this into a page and open it. Can you guys see that? There we go. Here, I'll move this away so you can see this. So here's the paper. It's from, we'll paste the citation in here. Let's see. References. It's also useful to look at these references sometimes, depending on how deep you want to go into this research. And it can also be useful to look at conflict of interest. Occasionally, one of these studies will be run by someone who sells you air quality monitors or something like that, and they might want to fearmonger you a bit. Yeah, so here's the citation. And, results and conclusions. Well, here, let's just put the whole abstract in here. This can be useful. Yeah, so looking, just starting from the results, we see that there's this green building, which I don't know what that is, and green plus building, which I don't know what that is. So let's look at the methods. Let's see. Okay, so objective. We simulated indoor environmental quality conditions in green and conventional buildings and evaluated the impacts on objective measure of human performance, higher order cognitive function, right? Okay, so like I'm not a psychologist or whatever. I'm not totally sure what the definition of that is, but we could look that up later. Yeah, so they put participants, these are humans, that's good to know, and they spent 6 full work days blind to the test conditions. On different days, they were exposed. Okay, so conventional was sort of like a high level of these volatile organic compounds, which are these little particulate pollutions in the air. Green was low concentrations, and then there was a green plus with high outdoor air ventilation rate, and then it looks like they also controlled with CO2 levels as well, independent of ventilation. So interesting. Okay. So green was low VOC, green plus was low VOC and a high ventilation rate. Okay, so this is pretty damning, right? 61% higher for green and 100% higher on 2 green plus days. So if you're in a conventional building with moderate levels of VOCs and no or poor ventilation, you're basically having your cognitive abilities, your high order cognitive function. That's kind of shitty. Okay, so that's that's definitely something I want to pull out. So why does air quality matter? Well, we can take a look at the study, and it's pretty clear that VOCs and CO2 are both like kind of horrible for your cognitive function. What are the compounds and gases that affect cognitive function? It seems like there's 2 important things that keep coming up, right? There's VOCs and why is this bolded? I don't want this bolded. Anyways, there's VOCs and CO2, and they seem to operate independently of each other, right? So VOCs are these volatile organic compounds, and they're like particulate that's in the air, and CO2 is a gas that we breathe out. and can accumulate without proper ventilation. Okay, let's see. Going back to the video notes, there was some other rabbit holes. There's this Struford and Sweezy paper, and then there's this paper on is CO2 an indoor pollutant. This is like more evidence that CO2 and yeah, just CO2. So this is more like a CO2 one. It looks like. Try this. Cool, and we'll take a look at this. Oops. I can't put a question mark in the file name. Okay, cool. And we're looking at this abstract. Yeah, so higher CO2 is associated with impaired work performance, increased health symptoms, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this one they looked at different CO2 levels, so this might be helpful for, what are some appropriate CO2 levels? They got 600, 1,000, and 2,500. Yeah, conclusions. So direct adverse effects of CO2 on human performance may be economically important, right? If you're paying a bunch of people a lot of money to work on code and stuff, and they're all thinking stupidly because your office is poorly ventilated, that's not good. Cool. Yeah, this might be helpful for later. Yeah, at 1,000. So like even 1,000 is noticeable on 6 out of 9 scales of decision-making performance. And it's even more noticeable at 2,500. Well, this is interesting. So focused activity was actually improved with CO2. So maybe if you really need to focus on one specific item and don't want to think more broadly, you should pump some CO2 in your room. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. Maybe close the door and the window or something. Cool. Okay. Helpful. Going back to our project. Yeah. What are the compounds? VOC, CO2. VOCs. So this is another question. Is like, is bad air quality associated with shorter lifespan, right? I don't have any information in my PKM yet about this, but this is like, this is exposing a hole in my PKM that, hey, you don't have any stuff on lifespan. So you can see how we can start to pull together information. And what's cool is when you start to, when you do projects part of the time and you do just like random exploring part of the time, you start to find more and more connections. And as you build your PKM, as you build notes, you'll start to find that you don't need to do this activity where you're just looking on the web for papers and stuff like that, because you already have papers and notes and references all there. Yeah, this last one has to do with epigenetics for sure. Like epigenetics is fascinating. I don't know too much about it, but my understanding is it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, Norm, but it's like, environmental qualities can change the way your genes express themselves. And maybe, it's quite possible that living in a very polluted environment might change the way that your body functions. Cool. So, I think next, I'm going to have to close up the stream pretty soon, but next time we take a look at this, I might keep working on the CO2 paper, and maybe we'll keep exploring some other topics like epigenetics or something interesting. Yeah. Environmental design for biological entities. That sounds super cool. I like that. Yeah, like this is what's fun about PKMs. You can start to expose holes in your knowledge and find things that are super fascinating. And when you live stream it, you get to get more outside perspective, which is pretty cool too. Yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. Today we talked about mess and dove in a little bit on a project, made some progress on it. Thanks, Norm. Thanks for hanging around, and I'll see you guys next time.